The eviction notice was taped to the door at 7 o'clock in the morning. Eleanor Briggs didn't pull it off right away. She stood in the hallway in her housecoat and read it twice, slowly, the way you read something you already knew was coming, but hoped you were wrong about. 73 years old, no husband, no children, no one to call. At the bottom of a cardboard box in her closet beneath a Bible and a broken watch was a single sheet of paper she'd nearly thrown away 11 years ago. A deed. A garage on a county road in Merrill County, Tennessee. Left to her by a brother her whole family had spent decades pretending didn't exist. My name is Frank, and before we go any further, I want you to sit with something. A 73-year-old woman, everything gone, and the only door still open was left to her by the one person the family had written off a long time ago. The black sheep, the embarrassment, the one nobody flew in to bury. What she found inside that garage changed everything she thought she knew about him and about herself. Before I go on, where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one because this story stayed with me, and I think you'll understand why long before it's over. The notice came on a Tuesday. Eleanor Briggs had lived long enough to know that the worst news in life rarely arrives with thunder. It comes quietly. It comes on ordinary paper in ordinary ink, taped to an ordinary door at 7 o'clock, on an ordinary morning while the coffee is still too hot to drink, and the radiator is still ticking itself awake. She heard the footsteps in the hall before she saw the paper. Heavy boots, a man in a hurry, the soft tearing sound of tape pulled from a roll. By the time she opened her door, he was already 3 apartments down, not looking back. He had done this before. He would do it again before lunch. To him, it was nothing. A delivery, a task on a list. To Eleanor, it was the end of 41 years. She did not pull the notice off the door right away. She stood there in her housecoat, her reading glasses pushed up into her thin white hair, and she read it twice. Slowly. The way you read something when you already know what it says. But some stubborn corner of your heart is still hoping the words will rearrange themselves into mercy. They did not. Notice to vacate. 30 days. Failure to comply will result in legal removal of all persons and property. She was 73 years old. She had buried a husband. She had no children to call because the children had never come, and after a while she and Gerald had stopped talking about why. She had no brother to call because the only brother who might have answered had been dead for 11 years, and the other one had stopped speaking to her long before that. She had a sister-in-law who sent a card at Christmas with a printed signature. She had a nephew she would not have recognized on the street. She had no one to call. She went back inside. She closed the door softly, the way you close a door when there's no one to slam it for. And she did the only thing a woman of her generation knew to do when the floor opened up beneath her. She made coffee. She sat at the small kitchen table by the window in the chair she had sat in every morning for 41 years, and she set the eviction notice down on the formica next to her cup. 2 pieces of paper side by side. One held coffee. The other held the rest of her life. She looked at them both for a long time, and she did not cry, because the crying she had in her had been spent years ago on things she could no longer quite remember the shape of. Outside, the city went on. A bus hissed at the corner. A man argued with a parking meter. Somewhere a dog barked twice and gave up. The world did not know that Eleanor Briggs had run out of room in it, and the world would not have slowed down if it did. Here is something I want you to understand about a woman like Eleanor. She had spent her whole life being told she was lucky. Lucky to have married Gerald, a careful man with a careful job. Lucky to have a pension that covered just enough of family that looked respectable in church. She had been raised to believe that safety was the highest thing a person could reach for, and she had reached for it, and she had held it, and now, at 73, she sat at a kitchen table and discovered that safety is not a thing you own. It is a thing you rent. And the lease can be canceled on a Tuesday morning by a man in heavy boots who never looks back. She finished the coffee. She rinsed the cup. And because she did not know what else to do with her hands, she began to pack. It did not take as long as it should have. 41 years, and most of it fit into boxes that had once held bananas and printer paper. The good dishes, the photo albums, Gerald's reading glasses, which she had never been able to throw away. A wedding ring she no longer wore because her knuckles had swollen with the years kept in a film canister in the back of a drawer. It was in the closet on the highest shelf that she found the box. She almost didn't take it down. It was heavy and awkward, and her shoulder had been aching for a month. But something made her reach. A box you haven't opened in 11 years has a way of pulling at you, the way a closed door at the end of a hallway pulls at you in a dream. She set it on the bed and folded back the flaps. A Bible, the cover cracked, that had belonged to her mother. A wristwatch with a broken band that had belonged to her father. A handful of photographs she had not looked at in so long she'd forgotten they existed. And underneath all of it, flat against the cardboard bottom, a single folded sheet of heavy paper that had gone soft and gray at the creases. She opened it. It was a deed. She remembered it now. The way you remember a smell from childhood all at once and from nowhere. It had come in the mail 11 years ago, 2 weeks after the funeral she had attended alone. A form letter from the county clerk's office in a place called Merrow County, Tennessee. Property transferred upon death of owner. 1 garage, 1 acre, 1 county road. Left to her by Roy. She had shown it to Gerald back then. She remembered the way he had taken it from her hands, turned it over once, and set it down on the counter, the way you set down a thing you've already decided about. "It's not worth the taxes," he'd said. "Leave it be." and she had left it be. She had filed it in a box and put the box on a shelf, and she had not thought about it again, because Gerald was a careful man, and Eleanor had spent her whole life agreeing with careful men. Now Gerald was 4 years in the ground. The apartment was gone. The box was the only thing she had left that was truly hers. And the garage. The garage was the only thing left of Roy. She sat down on the edge of the bed with the deed in her 2 hands, and for the first time in a very long time, Eleanor Briggs felt something move in her chest that was not fear and was not grief. It was a direction. I want to stop here just for a moment, because this is where the whole thing turns, and most people miss it. A man told this woman 11 years ago that her brother's last gift to her was worthless. Not worth the taxes. Leave it be. And she believed him because that is what she had been trained to do. And for 11 years, a door stood open at the end of a county road in Tennessee with her name on the deed, and she never once walked through it. How many doors have been standing open in your life just like that because somebody you trusted told you they led nowhere? She left most of the boxes behind. That is the part that still gets me when I tell it. A woman packs up 41 years, and then she looks at all those boxes stacked in the middle of the floor, and she understands something hard and true. There is no place to take them, no house waiting, no spare room at a relative's, no storage unit she can afford. The 41 years would have to be given to the wind, so she took a suitcase. 1. She took the photographs and the Bible and the broken watch and the deed and $200 in cash folded into the inside pocket of her good coat. She took her late husband's reading glasses because she still could not leave them. And she walked out of the apartment without looking back, the way the man in the heavy boots had walked away from her door. Except that she did look back once at the kitchen table by the window before she closed the door for the last time. The car was a 15-year-old sedan with 210,000 miles on it and a check engine light that had been on so long she'd stopped seeing it. She wrote the address from the deed on the back of an envelope and propped it on the dashboard. She did not own a smartphone. She had a paper map folded to Tennessee and a full tank of gas she had paid for with money she did not have. And she drove. It was 4 hours to Merrow County. 4 hours of interstate giving way to highway, giving way to 2-lane blacktop. The cities thinning out into towns, and the towns thinning out into nothing at all. She drove with both hands on the wheel and her back straight, the way her father had taught her 60 years before. And somewhere around the 3rd hour, the radio lost the last station, and she let it hiss into static, and then she turned it off. And she drove the rest of the way in a silence so complete she could hear her own breathing. The land changed as she went. She had grown up not so far from here, though she had spent her whole adult life pretending she hadn't. There was something in the shape of the hills that her body remembered before her mind did. The way the road rose and fell, the red clay showing through where the shoulder had washed away. The cedar and the scrub oak and the long stretches of pasture gone gold and brittle with the late season. She had spent 50 years in a city built to make you forget you came from anywhere. And now, 4 hours into the dark of an afternoon, she had not planned to live through the country, was reaching up through the floorboards and taking her by the ankle. The turnoff for County Road 9 was easy to miss, and she missed it twice. The third time she found it, she almost drove past again because it didn't look like a road that led to anything. Just 2 strips of cracked asphalt running between fences mesquite and cedar, crowding in close a cattle gate standing open and rusted on its hinges. She slowed the car to a crawl and read the numbers on the mailboxes, the few that were left, and the numbers climbed toward the one written on her envelope. And then at the end of a gravel drive a half-mile past the last fence, she saw it. A low building of cinder block painted a red that had faded almost to the color of the clay around it. A flat roof sagging slightly at one corner. 2 bay doors, both rolled down and locked. Kudzu had climbed the whole south wall and was reaching for the roof, green hands grabbing at the eaves. One window was cracked clear across and sealed with duct tape that had dried to nothing and curled away at the edges. And above the bay doors, bolted to the block, a hand-welded iron sign, the letters made of bent rod and rusted now to lace so that she could not read it from the car. Eleanor stopped the engine. She sat in the sudden quiet with her hands still on the wheel. The light was going long and gold across the field the hour before dusk, when shadows stretch out twice their length, and the whole world seems to lean toward evening. A hawk turned slow circles over the pasture. The wind moved through the dry grass and made a sound like the sea. If you had never heard the sea and had to guess at it, she had driven 4 hours to a place she had never been left to her by a man she had not really known, on the strength of a piece of paper she had nearly thrown away. She was 73 years old. She had $200 and a suitcase, and no plan beyond the next 10 minutes. She got out of the car. The air hit her first. It smelled of rust and dry grass and motor oil gone old in the ground. And underneath all of it, something else. Something older that she could not name, and that made the back of her throat tighten without her permission. She walked to the bay doors and tried them, and they did not move. She found on the deed's envelope a small brass key taped to the inside flap, the way the county clerk had sent it 11 years ago, and a second key she did not recognize on the same ring. The first key fit a padlock on a side door she hadn't noticed, half hidden by the kudzu. She worked it back and forth. The lock was stubborn with 11 years of weather. And then it turned with a gritty, reluctant click, the sound of something that has been holding its breath, finally letting it go. The door swung inward into the dark. Eleanor stood on the threshold and let her eyes adjust. Cool air came out to meet her, still and thick, the held breath of a closed room. Dust hung in the long bars of light that fell through the dirty windows, turning slowly, going nowhere. The concrete floor stretched away into shadow, stained black in patches where decades of oil had soaked into it and become part of it. And then she saw the walls. I have told this story 100 times, and I have never once been able to get this part right, because there are some things words were not built to carry. But I will try. The back wall of that garage, the whole of it floor to ceiling, was a single sheet of pegboard, and on the pegboard hung tools. Every tool a working man could need, and 100 more besides. Wrenches in rising order, smallest to largest. Sockets in their ranks. Screwdrivers, pliers, hammers, files, things she did not have names for. And around each and every one of them, drawn in black marker directly onto the board, was an outline. A careful, patient outline, tracing the exact shape of the tool that hung there, so that even if the tool were taken down, you would know precisely where it belonged and precisely what was missing. Not one outline stood empty. Every tool was home. She walked toward it the way you walk toward an altar, slowly, with her hands at her sides. She stood in front of that wall, and she looked at the 1,000 careful lines, the work of a man who had stood here year after year and traced the edge of every single thing he owned, because he believed she understood this all at once, standing there. And the understanding went into her like a needle, because he believed that everything had a place, and that a thing without a place was a thing that could be lost, and that he would not allow anything in his keeping to be lost. And she had not known him at all. That was the thought that finally cracked her. Not grief, not even sorrow exactly. Something quieter and more terrible than both. She had spent her whole life inside a family that had decided who Roy was: the troublemaker, the embarrassment, the one who chose motorcycles over a steady job, a club over a career, a road over a roof. And she had let them decide it, because deciding it for herself would have cost her something. And she had spent her whole life avoiding the things that cost. She stood in the middle of his life, looking at the careful lines he had drawn, and she understood that she had never once looked at him. Not really, not as a man, and that this empty garage at the end of a county road was the only chance she would ever get, and that he was 11 years too dead to know she had finally come. She did not cry. She had thought she might, but she did not. She had done her crying somewhere else in some other year, over things she could no longer name. She set her suitcase down against the wall, and she stood very still in the long gold light, and she let the garage hold her the way it had clearly held a great many people before her. After a while, she began to walk. There were 2 lifts in the main bay, one hydraulic and one manual, both showing rust, but both intact. A long steel workbench ran along one wall with a heavy vise bolted to the corner of it, the jaws worn shiny from use. There were calendars on the walls, 11 years out of date. The pages still turned to a December no one had lived to finish. There was a coffee maker on a shelf, an old percolator type, the glass pot still in its cradle with a half-inch of something black and ancient dried into the bottom of it. And in the back, past the workbench, a narrow door stood ajar. Eleanor pushed it open. It was a small room, smaller than her kitchen had been. A cot against one wall, the blanket folded with a tightness that spoke of habit. A 2-burner stove, a dresser with 3 drawers, a single chair by a window that looked out at the road, and on a hook beside the door, a jacket. Leather dark worn soft and pale at the elbows and the cuffs with patches sewn onto it that she did not recognize, the patches of a life she had never been invited into. This was where he had lived. The last years of his life, this small back room had been his home. The cot, the stove, the chair by the window. A man who had once been a boy in the same house she had been a girl in, who had been read the same Bible and scolded by the same father, had ended his days alone in a cinder block room behind a garage with a folded blanket and a view of an empty road. She did not touch the jacket. It seemed to her the most private thing in the world, that jacket, and to touch it without permission would have been a kind of theft. But she stood and looked at it for a long time, at the shape of him still held in the leather, the way the elbows bent, the way his elbows must have bent, and she felt the years between them like a physical distance. Like the 4 hours of road she had just driven, except that this road could not be driven because it ran backward into time, and the man at the far end of it was gone. She went back out into the main bay. The light was lower now, the gold gone orange at the edges. She should have been thinking about practical things, where she would sleep, what she would eat, whether the $200 would last the week. But she was not thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the careful lines on the pegboard, and she found herself drawn back to them, back behind the workbench, running her fingers along the wall, the way you run your fingers along the spine of a book, looking for the place where it opens, and her fingers found a seam. Not a crack, a seam. In the wood paneling below the pegboard, a straight vertical line where 2 pieces of wood met that should not have met there, too clean and too deliberate to be the work of age. She knelt down her knees, protesting one hand on the cold concrete to steady herself. She worked her fingernails into the edge of the seam. The panel came away with a dry scrape. Behind it was a hollow in the wall, and in the hollow were 3 things. A metal box, the gray utility kind you buy at any hardware store. A leather-bound journal, thick and soft, with handling held shut with a rubber band gone brittle with age. And a bundle of envelopes, dozens of them, tied together with the length of ordinary kitchen twine. Eleanor lifted them out one at a time and set them on the concrete in front of her knees as carefully as if they were made of glass. Her hands were not quite steady. The light from the windows had gone the color of a struck match. She reached for the envelopes first because the top one had her name on it. Just her name. Eleanor. In block letters, careful and square, pressed hard enough into the paper that she could feel the grooves of them under her thumb. But she did not open it. Not yet. Something told her, some instinct she did not know she had, that the letter was the end of something, and that you do not read the end before you have read the rest. So she set the envelope aside gently, and she picked up the journal instead, and she slid the brittle rubber band off, and it crumbled to pieces in her fingers, and she opened to the first page. The handwriting stopped her breath. It was small and neat, and it slanted slightly to the right, and she knew it. Not the way you know a stranger's hand, the way you know a voice. It was her brother's handwriting, the same hand that had once signed a birthday card to a girl of 9. The same hand she had not seen in 50 years, and it came up off the page and took her by the throat. She read, March the 4th. Lent Earl Tuttle $300 for the truck payment. His wife just had the baby. Told him to pay it back when he can. He won't be able to. That's all right. She turned the page. Fixed the Dempsey woman's transmission. Charged her $40 for the parts. Nothing for the labor. She's raising 2 on her own since the husband took off. The little one sat in the bay and watched me work the whole time. Didn't say a word. Good kid. She turned the page, and the next, and the next. Page after page, year after year, name after name. Every loan he had made, every repair he had done for free, every bag of groceries he had slipped into the bed of someone's truck while they were inside paying for the part they could barely afford. A man came in with a dead battery and no money, and left with a new battery and a full tank, and no idea how. A boy needed tires to get to a job 40 miles away and woke up to find them on his car. A widow's furnace died in January, and a check arrived in her mailbox unsigned, with no return address that covered the repair exactly. Roy had written it all down. Not the way a man writes down debts, the way a man writes down prayers. And he had told no one. Eleanor sat on the cold concrete floor of her brother's garage, and she read until the light through the windows turned from orange to gray, and from gray to nearly nothing. And still she read, holding the journal up to catch the last of it, because she could not stop, because every page was a piece of him she had never been given, and she was starving for it. She discovered she had been starving for 50 years. Her brother had not been the problem. He had been the solution. The quiet, invisible, unthanked solution to more hardship than she could count in a county full of people who had never had a chance and had found somehow one man who refused to let them fall all the way down. And not one person in her family had ever known. Not one of them had ever looked. They had spent decades deciding who he was, and they had never once driven the 4 hours to find out. I want you to think about somebody, the one your family wrote off, the one who didn't fit, the one you stopped calling, the one who became a story you told at the table, the cautionary tale, the embarrassment. I want you to think about the possibility, just the possibility, that you never knew the half of what that person was carrying, or the half of what they were quietly doing for everyone around them in the dark, where you weren't looking. There are people walking the earth right now who owe everything to someone who never once said a word about it. And some of those someones died alone in a back room with a folded blanket and a view of an empty road. Eleanor closed the journal. Her hands were shaking now, not from cold, though the room had gone cold. She reached for the metal box and worked the latch and lifted the lid. Inside, there was money, small bills, 5s and 10s and 1s folded and rubber banded, $380 by her count. A second set of keys, heavier than the ones she'd come with, that she did not recognize. And a folded document beneath the cash that turned out to be the original deed to the property, older than the copy the clerk had sent her. The paper gone yellow with a county seal pressed into the corner, and a date so old she had to hold it to the dying light to read it. She set the box aside and untied the bundle of envelopes. They were not bills. They were not letters Roy had written. They were letters Roy had been given. Thank you notes, dozens of them, written on notebook paper and on the backs of receipts and on pages torn from children's composition books. Some in a careful adult hand, and some in the wobbling letters of a child. Every one of them addressed to Roy, and every one of them in its own words said the same thing. You saved us. You never asked for anything. We will never forget. Thank you. She read them in the last of the light, one after another, and somewhere in the middle of them, she stopped being able to tell whose eyes the wetness on the page belonged to, hers or theirs, the living or the dead, the woman on the floor or the children who had grown up and never forgotten the man who fixed their mother's car for nothing on a winter morning. When the light was finally gone, she set the letters down, and she picked up the journal one more time because she had not finished it, and she did not want to leave a single page of him unread. The last entries were thinner, the handwriting less steady. A man's hand in his final years, when the body has begun to argue with the work. And then, near the very end, a page that was different from all the others. It was not a record of a kindness. It was a record of a thought. She heard about it again today, Roy had written. The store. After all these years, they still tell it the way they told it back then. Vernon told his boy, and his boy told it like gospel. I don't correct it. Never have. What good would it do now? But I'll tell you this, Eleanor, since you're the only one I ever wanted to tell, I'd do it again. Every part of it. I'd do it the exact same way, knowing everything I know now. I never once regretted it. Not for you. Never for you. Eleanor read it 3 times. She did not understand it. She did not know what store he meant, or what he had done, or what he would do again, or why he was telling her who was not even here, who would not read these words until she felt the cold go all the way through her now, until she had run out of every other place to go. Because that was the thing that came to her in the dark, sitting on the floor of her dead brother's garage, with his secret history spread out around her knees. He had written this to her, not to anyone, to her. He had hidden it behind a panel in a wall, and he had left her the deed to the building, and he had known that one day she would have nowhere else, and she would come, and she would find the seam in the wall, and she would kneel down and open it and read his hand by the dying light. He had been waiting for her for 11 years, for longer than that maybe, for her whole life. She set the journal in her lap. Her chest was rising and falling now in a way she could not fully control. And finally, in the dark, by the thin gray light coming off the windows, she reached for the last envelope.
The one with her name on it. The one she had set aside because you do not read the end before you have read the rest.
She slid her thumb under the flap, and it gave way. The old glue long surrendered, and she drew out a single folded page. Dear Eleanor, it began. If you're reading this, then you found your way here. I always thought you would. Not because you were looking for me. I figure it's because you ran out of every other door. That's all right. That's how most good things start. This place isn't worth much on paper. They'll tell you that. Somebody already told you that, didn't they? But it's worth everything to the people who have walked through that bay door. And there have been more of them than you'd believe. I kept the records. I wrote it all down. Not because I wanted credit. I never wanted credit. I wrote it down because I wanted somebody someday to know what this place was for. And I always hoped that somebody would be you. You were the only one in that whole family who ever looked at me like I was worth looking at. You were 9 years old, and you didn't know any better yet. And you looked at me like I hung the moon, and then they got to you the way they get to everybody here, and you stopped. But I never forgot that you used to. Not once. A man can live a long time on a thing like that. I did. Don't sell it. Keep the light on at night. The one over the bay door. People drive by and they need to see it's on. And keep the coffee going. I know that sounds like nothing. It isn't nothing. It's the whole thing. It's the only thing. I'm sorry I wasn't braver about us. I'm sorry I let it go the way it went. There's more I have to tell you, but not yet. Not in this letter. When the time is right, you'll find the rest of it, and you'll understand everything. And I hope to God you'll forgive me, though there's nothing to forgive. Not really. Not from your side of it. Keep the light on Eleanor. Your brother Roy. She read it once fast, the way you read something you're afraid to read. And then she read it again, slow, her finger moving under each line. And then she folded it back along its old creases, and she pressed it flat against her chest, both hands, the way you hold a thing to keep it from being taken. Outside, the Tennessee sky had gone full dark. She got up finally, her body stiff and aching from the cold floor, and she walked to the bay door and looked out through the duct-taped window at the night. And she saw the stars. More stars than she had seen in 50 years of city living, the whole great wheel of them turning slow and silent over the black shape of the land. She had forgotten there were so many. She had forgotten you could feel that small and not be afraid of it. There's more I have to tell you, the letter had said. When the time is right, you'll find the rest of it. Somewhere out in the dark, a long way off, an engine turned over and faded. A truck on a distant road. A life going on. And Eleanor Briggs, 73 years old, with $200 and a suitcase and a building that a careful man had told her was worth nothing, stood in the open bay door of her brother's garage and understood all at once and from nowhere that she was not going to sell it. She was not going anywhere at all. She went to the percolator on the shelf. She rinsed the ancient pot in the cold water of the back room sink until it ran clear. She found a can of coffee in the cupboard, sealed 11 years old, and she did not know if coffee that old was any good, and she did not care. She filled the pot. She found the switch. And the old machine coughed and ticked and began against every reasonable expectation to work. The first smell of coffee filled the garage. And out over the bay door, when she found the switch for it on the wall, a single bulb in a steel cage flickered and caught and burned a small, hard light, shining out into the enormous dark. The way it had shone for years and years, before she ever came, telling anyone who passed on that lonely road the one thing her brother had ever really wanted to say. The light was on. Somebody was home. She did not know that first night what was coming. She did not know about the men who would come up the gravel drive in the morning, or the woman with the casserole, or the boy who had nowhere to sleep. She did not know about the letter on the heavy paper that would arrive on a Thursday and try to take it all away, or the nephew she barely remembered, or the company that had its eye on the dirt beneath her feet. She did not know the rest of what Roy had to tell her, the thing about the store, the thing he would do again. All she knew that first night was that she was tired in a way that went all the way down, and that for the first time in longer than she could remember, the tiredness was not the bad kind. She poured herself a cup of 11-year-old coffee, and she sat down in the single chair by the window in the back room where her brother had spent his last years. And she looked out at the dark road and the burning light, and she waited for the morning to come. And somewhere on a county road a long way off, a man who had heard the way men hear things in the country, that there was a light on again at Roy Calhoun's place, turned his truck toward home. She heard the truck before she saw it. Eleanor had slept against all odds on the narrow cot in the back room under the folded blanket that still smelled faintly of a man she'd never known. And she woke before light to a silence so total it had weight. For a moment, she did not know where she was. The ceiling was wrong. The air was wrong. And then it came back to her all at once. The notice on the door, the 4 hours of road, the seam in the wall, the letter pressed to her chest, and she lay still and let it settle, the way you let cold water settle before you decide to step into it. She made coffee in the dark. The old percolator was learning to trust her, and she was standing in the open bay door with the cup in both hands, watching the gray come up over the pasture when she heard it. An engine, low and unhurried, coming up the county road. It slowed at the gravel turnoff. It came up the drive at a crawl tires, popping on the loose stone, and then it stopped, and the engine cut, and the silence came back. But it was a different silence now, a waiting one. A man got out of the truck. He was big through the shoulders, in the way of men who had done hard work their whole lives, and never quite lost the frame of it, though he had to be near 70 himself. White beard cropped close, a denim vest worn over a flannel shirt, and on the vest patches, the same patches she saw with a small electric jolt that were sewn onto the jacket hanging on the hook in the back room. He stood in front of the building with his arms crossed, and he did not come closer. He looked at the garage the way a man looks at something he has been watching over for a long time. The way you look at a grave, you keep clean. Then he looked at her. It was not a hostile look, but it was not an open one either. It was the look a man gives a stranger he has found standing in a place that does not belong to strangers. "You'd be Roy's people," he said. It was not quite a question. "I'm his sister." Something moved across his face. Not warmth. Not yet. A recalibration, the way a man's face changes when a thing he thought he understood turns out to be something else. "He had a sister," the man said slowly. He said you were the only one in that whole family worth a damn. He uncrossed his arms. "Didn't think you'd ever come." "Neither did I," Eleanor said. For a moment, neither of them moved. The light was coming up gold behind him now, throwing his long shadow across the gravel toward her feet. And then he nodded once, as if something had been decided, and he came forward, and he held out a hand the size of a dinner plate. "Otis Boone," he said. "I rode with your brother better than 20 years. She took the hand. It swallowed hers. "Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Briggs. I want you to notice something here because it matters, and it'll matter more before we're through." This man drove out to a garage at the edge of nowhere at the first gray of morning because he'd heard a light was on. He didn't come to claim anything. He didn't come to ask anything. He came because a man he'd loved was gone, and the man's place had a light on in it again, and Otis Boone needed to see with his own eyes who had turned it on. "That is a kind of loyalty that is going out of the world, gentlemen," You know the kind I mean. You may be one of the last men alive who does.
She made him coffee. There was nothing else to offer. They sat on a pair of overturned buckets in the open bay in the long gold light of the morning, drinking from mismatched mugs she'd found in the cupboard. And for a while, neither of them said much of anything, because some men and some women understand that the important things have to be walked up on slowly from the side, the way you walk up on a skittish animal. It was Otis who finally spoke. "You know what this place was," he said. It was not a question either. "I'm starting to," she said. She went and got the journal. She did not know why she trusted him with it, except that the patches on his vest matched the patches on the jacket, and her brother had let this man stand close for 20 years, and that was a recommendation she had no right to argue with. Otis took the journal in his big hands, and he opened it, and he began to read. And Eleanor watched a thing happen to his face that she would not forget. He read the first page, and the second, and the 10th, and the longer he read, the stiller he became, until he was not moving at all, except for his eyes going down the lines and his jaw working slowly. And at last, he closed the journal and set it on his knee and looked out at the road for a long time. "That stubborn old fool," he said quietly. "He never told a soul." "You knew, though," she said. "Some of it." "Some." He shook his head. "Caught him once. 2 in the morning, loading a man's truck full of groceries out behind the IGA. Asked him what in the hell he was doing." Otis almost smiled, and it almost broke him to do it. "Told me he was reorganizing inventory. Into the back of somebody else's truck." "Into the back of somebody else's truck," Otis said. They sat with that. The hawk was back over the pasture, turning its slow circles. A truck went by out on the county road far off, and the driver lifted 2 fingers off the wheel without slowing a salute to the light to whoever had turned it on, and Eleanor felt the old country greeting reach across 50 years and touch her, and her eyes stung, and she let them. 11 years, Otis said. "You want to know how this place is still standing?" She did. Bank wanted it. County wanted its taxes. Roy didn't have a will worth the name. You know how he was. Everything in his head, nothing on paper that a lawyer'd respect. So a few of us. He stopped. He turned the mug in his hands. A few of us just kept it up, paid the taxes down to the minimum every year so the county couldn't take it. Came out once a month and ran the water so the pipes wouldn't freeze and bust. Checked the locks. Kept the kudzu off the roof mostly. He shrugged his big shoulders. Nobody asked us to. "Why?" she said. The word came out smaller than she meant it. Otis looked at her like the answer was the simplest thing in the world. "Because Roy would have done the same for any one of us," he said. "Did do the same. For most of us. More than once. There it is. There is the whole thing in one sentence from a man on a bucket with a cup of coffee. Roy would have done the same. Do you have men like that in your life? Men who would keep your place standing for 11 years after you were gone, for no reason
but that you'd have done it for them. If you do, I hope you've told them what they mean to you. And if you don't, well, it's never too late to be that man for somebody else.
He left near noon. He said he'd be back. He didn't say when, and she understood that with men like Otis, that was a promise, and not a maybe. He was back the next morning, and he was not alone. Word travels fast on a county road, faster than telephone, faster than the mail. By that second afternoon, Eleanor had stopped being surprised by the sound of tires on the gravel, because the sound came again and again, and each time it brought something with it.
A man she had never seen pulled up in an old Ford, got out, lifted a case of motor oil from the bed, set it down by the bay door, nodded at her, once through the open door, got back in and drove away. He never said a word.
A woman came up the drive in a hatchback with a casserole dish warm on the passenger seat. She carried it in with both hands and set it on the workbench and laid a square of paper on top of it. The paper said in a looping hand, "Welcome Roy's sister. There's more where this came from." She squeezed Eleanor's arm, and she was gone before Eleanor could think what to say.
An old couple drove 40 minutes from the next county over to sit on the concrete apron out front in 2 folding chairs they'd brought in their trunk and drink coffee with her, and tell her about the time 20 years gone when their truck had died on Christmas Eve out on the highway with all the presents in the back, and a man on a motorcycle had stopped and towed them to his garage and fixed the truck right there on the holiday and refused to take $1 for it because he'd said he didn't work holidays and a thing done on a holiday wasn't work. It was just being neighborly. "We never forgot him," the old woman said. 40 minutes is nothing. We'd have driven all day." Each of them carried a piece of Roy that Eleanor had never had, and she found herself doing a thing she had not planned to do, had no reason to do, except that it felt wrong to let any of it disappear again into the silence it had lived in for 11 years. She started writing it down. She found a fresh notebook in the dresser drawer, blank, never used, as if her brother had bought it for her without knowing it. And she sat in the chair by the window in the evenings, and she wrote down the stories. The Christmas Eve truck, the case of motor oil with no name on it, the casserole. She wrote down the names when she had them and a description when she didn't, and slowly, page by page in her own hand, now next to the memory of his. The garage on County Road 9 began to come back to life. The boy came on the 4th day. He came in Otis's truck in the passenger seat, and he did not get out right away. Eleanor watched through the bay door as Otis came around and said something to him, and the boy shook his head, and Otis said something else, and finally the door opened, and the boy got down. He was young. 24, she'd learned, though he carried himself like someone who'd had to be older than that for a long time. Thin. Watchful, in the way of a person who has learned that good things have a price, and the price usually comes later. His clothes were clean, but they were the same clothes he'd been wearing for days, you could tell, and there was a particular kind of tiredness in his face that Eleanor recognized because she had seen it in the mirror not a week ago, sitting at a kitchen table with an eviction notice. "This is Asa," Otis said. "Asa Holloway." He's a hand. Good one. Just needs a place to put his hands to use. The boy would not look at her. I don't need charity, he said to the gravel. Good, Eleanor said before Otis could answer. Because I don't have any. What I've got is a hydraulic lift that hasn't run in 11 years and these hands. She held up her own thin and spotted with age. And I'm 73, so if you know which end of a wrench to hold, you'd be doing me a favor, not the other way around. The boy looked up at her then, just for a second. Something passed between them, some recognition. Two people who'd each been one bad Tuesday away from nothing. And he nodded once, and he went and looked at the lift. He had it running in 2 afternoons. He slept in his truck the first few nights parked beside the building, and Eleanor pretended not to notice the way you pretend not to notice a thing a proud person needs you not to notice. But she left the bay door unlocked, and she made sure the coffee was on before dawn when she heard him stirring out there in the cold. And on the 3rd morning, she found him already inside at the workbench. The pegboard tools spread out in front of him, cleaning them one at a time, and setting each one back exactly inside its black marker outline. He worked with a focus that stopped her in the doorway. Careful, patient. He'd pick up a wrench, work the grime out of it with an oiled rag, hold it up to the light to check it, and then fit it back against the wall, dead center, inside its outline, lining the edges up like it mattered. Like getting it wrong by a 1/4 inch would be a kind of sin. She watched him do it, and she felt the back of her throat tighten because she had seen that exact carefulness before, drawn in black marker on a pegboard. The work of a man who believed that everything had a place and that nothing in his keeping would be allowed to get lost. You keep them right, she said. He didn't look up. Tools work better when you know where they are, he said. Wastes the whole day hunting for what you already own. She had to step back into the doorway for a moment, because that was nearly word for word a line she had read in the journal in her brother's hand. 50 years and a whole life away. And the boy had never read the journal, and he didn't know. And she was not going to be the one to tell him, not yet. Because some things are too much to lay on a young man before breakfast. By the end of the first week, there were 4 of them. Otis had brought the others Dell, mostly a quiet man near 60, with grease worked so far into his knuckles, it had become part of him, and 2 more who came and went. Men from the county who'd known Roy, who showed up the way countrymen show up when there's work to be done and no one asked them to. With tools, without explanation. They patched the south wall where the kudzu had pulled the mortar loose. They tore out the cracked window and put in new glass. They got the second lift working. They resealed a corner of the roof that had been letting the weather in for a decade. Eleanor fed them. She had a little of the casserole money now, the small bills people pressed on her when she fixed a tire or topped off a fluid she barely knew the name of with Asa or Dell talking her through it. She made big pots of things and set them on the workbench, and the men ate standing up the way working men eat, and they talked, and they laughed sometimes, and slowly the garage stopped being a tomb and became a place where people came. One evening, sitting on the apron while the sun went down behind the cedar line, Otis said a thing he had not planned to say. Roy used to sit right here, he said, right where you're sitting, every night. Said it was the best part of the day. What was he watching for? Eleanor asked. Otis thought about it a long time. I don't think he was watching for anything, he said at last. I think he just wanted to be sure that anybody who came down that road could see the light was on. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It came in the regular mail in a stiff cream envelope of a quality that did not belong on a county road, and Eleanor knew before she opened it that it was trouble, because good news does not come on paper that expensive. Heavy stock. A law firm's name embossed across the top, an address in the city, a firm with 3 names, and the kind of typeface that costs money. She sat down at the workbench to read it, and she put on Gerald's reading glasses, and she read it twice the way she read everything that mattered, slowly hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something kinder. They did not. It was a claim against the estate. A nephew. Her nephew. The son of her late brother, Vernon, the good one. The one the family had held up against Roy his whole life. The steady one. The one who'd done everything right and died at 66 of a heart that had been hard a long time. His son. A man named Trent Calhoun, whom Eleanor had last seen as a boy of perhaps 10 at a Thanksgiving she could barely remember, and who was now, the letter informed her, asserting his rights as next of kin to contest the transfer of the property. The argument was this, that Roy's affairs had never been properly settled, that the deed transfer 11 years ago contained procedural errors, that without a valid will, the property should have passed to the broader family by the laws of the state, and that, as the son of Roy's brother, Trent Calhoun, had standing, was the word the letter used 3 times to claim what was rightfully the family's. There was a second page. Eleanor almost didn't read it, but she did because she read everything, and the second page was worse than the first. The second page mentioned in the careful, neutral language of lawyers that Trent Calhoun was acting in concert with interested parties, that a development concern had expressed an interest in acquiring the parcel, that County Road 9 was slated, the letter noted, as if in passing, for improvements in connection with a planned interchange, and that property values along the corridor were expected to appreciate considerably. Eleanor set the letter down. She took off the reading glasses, and she sat in the quiet of the garage, and she understood the way you understand the shape of a thing in the dark, by running your hands over it, what was really happening here. It was not about the family. It had never been about the family. The land was about to be worth money. Real money. A road was coming in interchange, the kind of thing that turns a half-acre of red clay into something a developer will pay for. And somebody had done the math, and somebody had looked up the records, and somebody had found a 73-year-old widow alone on the parcel, with no will to protect her, and no money to fight. And somebody had reached out to the one blood relative who might be persuaded that this was, after all, only fair. Roy had built a place where nobody kept score, and now men who did nothing but keep score had come for it. Here is what I need you to sit with while Eleanor sits there at that workbench with that letter in front of her. Everything good that man built, he built quiet. No name on it, no score kept. And the thing about a place like that, the cruel thing, is that it's defenseless. It has no contracts, no lawyers on retainer, no paper trail that a court will respect. It's held up by nothing but the goodness of the people who remember. And goodness, gentlemen, does not hold up in court. The men who came for that garage knew exactly what they were doing. They were betting that a good thing built by a good man would have no defense at all. Otis found out the next morning. County news, county road news. It all moves the same way, faster than you'd think, slower than the truth deserves. He came up the drive, and he came inside, and Eleanor handed him the letter without a word, and he read it with his lips moving slightly the way men of that age and that schooling read, and when he got to the second page, she saw his big hands tighten on the paper until it crackled. "Trent?" he said. The name came out of him like something spat. Vernon's boy. He used to come around when Roy was alive. Once. Stood right there in that bay and looked at this place like he was pricing it. He set the letter down. Roy fed him lunch. Boy didn't say thank you. "Can he do this?" Eleanor asked. "Can he win?" Otis was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know law," he said finally. "I know engines and I know men. And I know this, they wouldn't have spent the money on a letter like that if they didn't think they had a real shot at it." He looked at her. "You got a lawyer?" She almost laughed. "I have $200, she said. "I had 200. I have less now." She did not say the rest of it, but Otis was not a stupid man, and he heard it anyway. The money in the metal box, the $380 Roy had left, was gone. It had gone into glass for the window and seal for the roof and parts for the lift and food for the men who'd asked nothing for their labor. She had spent her brother's last cash bringing his garage back to life, and now she had nothing left to defend it with. "I'll ask around," Otis said. "There's people owe Roy. There's always people owe Roy." But she could see, even as he said it, that he did not know who or how or whether it would be enough, and that he was a man who built things with his hands and could not build this. She did not tell the others how bad it was. She fed them that evening as she always did, and she let them laugh, and she let the garage be a living place for one more night. Because she did not have the heart to put the shadow into it yet. And after they'd gone, she sat in the chair by the window in the back room in her brother's chair, and she looked out at the dark road and the burning light, and she let herself, for the first time since the notice on the door, feel how tired she was, how alone, how 73. That night, she called no one. There was no one to call. There had never been anyone to call. That was the whole truth of her life laid bare on a kitchen table a week ago, and laid bare again now in a chair by a window. And she sat in it the way you sit in cold water once you've stopped fighting it. And then the second blow fell, and it fell from the direction she least expected. Asa stopped coming. It was small at first. He didn't come in for breakfast one morning, and his truck was gone from beside the building, and Eleanor told herself he had errands, A young man had a life. It was nothing. But the next morning, the truck was gone too, and the morning after that. And on the third morning, the pegboard had a wrench out of place, a half-inch combination wrench hanging a quarter-inch off true, the edges not lined up inside its outline, and Eleanor stood in front of it and felt something cold move through her, because Asa Holloway did not leave tools out of place. Asa Holloway would have lined that wrench up if the building were on fire, and a wrench out of place meant he had left in a hurry, left without finishing, left the way you leave when something has gone wrong. It was Dell who told her 3 days later with his eyes on his boots. "Boy's got a record," Dell said quietly. "Did some time when he was younger. Nothing." He stopped. "Nothing he's proud of. Nothing that's who he is now. But it's there on the paper the way those things are." "And someone found it," Eleanor said. Dell nodded, miserable. "Word is, somebody went to him, told him if he didn't clear off, didn't stop helping you, they'd make sure everybody in 3 counties knew what he was. Make sure he never got hired honest again. Said it'd be a shame a boy trying to go straight." Dell's jaw worked. "Said it'd be his fault what happened to him for sticking his neck out for a fight that wasn't his." Eleanor closed her eyes. She understood it now. All of it. They had not just come for the land. They had come for the people. They had looked at the thing Roy built, the place where a boy with a record could put his hands to honest use and become someone, the place where nobody kept score. And they had found the one boy with the most to lose, and they had used him the way men who keep score always find the weak seam and work their fingers into it until the whole thing comes apart in their hands. And it had worked. Asa was gone. The first crack in the thing her brother had built without a single contract to hold it together. There's a particular cruelty in it, isn't there? Not just taking a man's land, taking the people first, reaching into the one good thing a man built, and pulling out the youngest, the most fragile, the one who'd finally found somewhere to stand, and using that boy's own past as the crowbar. I've lived a long time, and I'll tell you the men who do that sleep just fine. That's the part that ought to make you angry. They sleep just fine. Eleanor went back into the garage that evening alone. The men had gone home. Otis was off chasing a lawyer who owed Roy a debt he wasn't sure was real. The wrench still hung a quarter-inch off true on the pegboard, and she could not bring herself to fix it because fixing it felt like admitting the boy was not coming back. She walked the empty bay in the falling dark, past the lifts, past the workbench, past the casserole dish she'd never returned. She came to the back wall and the careful black outlines, 1,000 of them, every tool home except the one that wasn't. She sat down in her brother's chair by the window. The letter on the heavy paper was in the drawer beside her. The lawyers in the city. The nephew who'd been fed lunch and never said thank you. The development concern. The interchange coming up County Road 9. And out beyond the glass, the dark and the road and the single bulb burning over the bay door, the light Roy had told her to keep on the light that said somebody was home. She thought about the people in the journal. She thought about Earl Tuttle, who couldn't make his truck payment with a new baby in the house. She thought about the Dempsey woman raising two alone, and the boy who sat in the bay and watched and didn't say a word. She thought about the widow whose furnace died in January and the unsigned check that covered it exactly. Every one of them had faced worse than this. Every one of them had faced it with less. And every one of them had found, at the end of a county road, one man who refused to let them fall all the way down. And now there was no one. Roy was 11 years dead. Otis could fix an engine, but not a court. The boy was gone. The men would fight the kudzu and the rust for her, but they could not fight 3 names on expensive letterhead and a company with money and a road coming. She was 73 years old, alone in a garage at the edge of nowhere with $200 she no longer had. And the only thing standing between her brother's life's work and the men who kept score was her. She looked at the letter in the drawer. She looked at the road. She looked at the light. And for a long, long moment in the chair where her brother had sat every night of his last years, Eleanor Briggs came closer than she had ever come to giving up. Closer than the kitchen table with the eviction notice. Closer than the 4 hours of dark road. Because at the kitchen table she'd had a door to walk through, and on the road she'd had a destination. But now she had walked through every door there was, and arrived at the last room, and there was no further door, only a window and a road and a light and a fight she did not know how to win. She did not pour herself a cup of coffee. She did not write in the notebook. She sat in the chair in the dark, and she let the tiredness have her all the way down, and she closed her eyes. And then somewhere in the dark of her own closed eyes, she heard her brother's voice. Not really. She knew it was not really. But she heard it the way you hear a voice you've read enough of that it stops being words on a page and becomes a sound. There's more I have to tell you, the voice said. When the time is right, you'll find the rest of it and you'll understand everything. Eleanor opened her eyes. She had not found the rest of it. She had read the journal and the letters and the letter with her name on it, and there had been that one strange page about the store, the thing he would do again, but she had not found whatever else there was because she had stopped looking. The week had filled up with men and coffee and casseroles and lifts that needed fixing, and she had stopped looking for the rest of what her brother had to tell her. When the time is right, she stood up out of the chair. Her knees protested. Her back protested. She was 73 and she was bone tired, and the time it seemed was now because she could not sit in that chair another minute with a fight she didn't know how to win. She turned on the light in the main bay, the bare bulbs in their steel cages, and she stood in the middle of the garage, and she looked at it differently than she had looked at it before. Not as a tomb. Not even as a place that people came to. She looked at it the way her brother must have looked at it, as a thing that had been built by a careful man. A man who hid a journal behind a seam in the wall. A man who believed everything had a place and nothing in his keeping would be allowed to get lost. A man like that did not leave only one secret in the wall. A man like that left a way to win somewhere for the day he knew would come, the day a 73-year-old woman would have run out of every other door and would need it. Eleanor Briggs rolled up the sleeves of her good coat, and she began to search. She searched the way her brother would have wanted her to, slowly, with method, inch by inch. She started at the pegboard because that was where he had lived in a way that wall of careful outlines. She ran her hands behind it, where she could reach feeling for seams, for hollows, for the kind of deliberate join that her fingers now knew to look for. She found nothing but cold block and old dust. She moved to the workbench and emptied every drawer onto the steel top, sorting through bolts and fittings and yellowed receipts, looking for anything that was a thing and not just a thing. She pulled the dresser away from the wall in the back room. She lifted the cot and felt along its frame. She took the drawers all the way out and turned them over to see if anything was taped beneath them. She searched until her back would not let her bend anymore, and then she sat down in the chair and rested, and then she got up and searched some more. It was nearly dawn when she stopped, not because she'd given up, but because her body had. She had found nothing, and sitting in the gray light, with her hands aching, she felt the despair come creeping back, and she pushed it off, and she made coffee instead, because that was the one instruction she had never once failed to follow. That was when Otis came up the drive. He was not alone, but it was not the lawyer he'd been chasing. It was a woman in a sensible gray car who got out with a leather briefcase and a pair of reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and a way of standing that told you she'd spent her life being the most prepared person in any room she walked into. "Eleanor," Otis said, "this is Frances Mercer." The woman shook Eleanor's hand with a grip that was dry and brief and exact. "Mrs. Briggs," she said, "I understand you're in a fight." "I understand I'm losing it," Eleanor said. Frances Mercer almost smiled. "We'll see." She was a retired attorney. She and her late husband had run a cattle operation out past Mineral Springs for 30 years, and for the better part of a decade, Roy Calhoun had kept their equipment running: the balers, the loaders, the old diesel tractor that should have died 10 times over. And he had never once, not one single time, charged them what the work was worth. Frances hadn't fully understood it while her husband was alive. He'd handled the equipment and the bills, and he'd kept the why of it to himself. It was only after he passed, going through the books, that she saw the pattern. Years of repairs billed at the cost of parts alone. Sometimes not even that. "I tried to thank him," she said. "Drove out here with a check. He wouldn't take it. Got almost angry. Told me a man doesn't get thanked for being a neighbor." She set the briefcase on the workbench. "I've been waiting 11 years for a way to settle that account. So let's be clear about something, Mrs. Briggs. I am not doing you a favor. I am paying a debt. The difference matters to me." I want you to hear what she said, because it is the whole secret of how a place like this defends itself. She did not come because she was generous. She came because she owed. Roy Calhoun spent his whole life refusing payment. And what he didn't understand, what maybe he couldn't let himself understand, is that a debt of kindness doesn't disappear when you refuse to collect it. It just waits. It sits on the books of a person's soul, gathering interest until the day it's needed. Roy built up 11 years of debts he never called in. And now, gentlemen, the bill was coming due in his favor. That is the arithmetic of a good life. It does not balance when you'd expect it to. It balances when it has to. Francis spread the documents across the workbench. The lawyer's letter. The copy of the deed the county clerk had sent 11 years ago. The notice of the claim. She read them the way a doctor reads an X-ray, fast, unsentimental, looking for the break. "All right," she said at last. "Here's the truth of it, and I won't dress it up because you don't strike me as a woman who wants it dressed up." She took off the reading glasses. "Their claim is weak. It's a nuisance claim. They're not arguing they have a better right than you. They're arguing the transfer to you was procedurally defective, that without a proper will, the property should have passed by intestate succession, and that, as your brother, Vernon's son, your nephew has standing to demand it be redistributed among the surviving family." "Ma." "And does he?" Eleanor asked. She found it the way you find the things you're meant to find. By accident, and not by accident at all. She had taken Roy's leather jacket down off the hook in the back room. She had decided finally that it was time to clean it, to oil the leather, to care for it the way he'd have cared for it, the way Asa cared for the tools. And in the inside pocket sewn so flat against the lining, she'd have missed it if her fingers hadn't known by now to look for seams, was a folded page. She looked up. "Do you have the original?" "I have a copy in a metal box," Eleanor said. "Older than that one, with a county seal." Francis's eyebrows went up half an inch, which on her was the equivalent of another woman shouting. "Show me." Eleanor brought the metal box. Francis examined the older deed under the work light, turning it to the seal, reading the date. And slowly her face changed the way Otis's had changed reading the journal. The way a face changes when a thing turns out to be more than it seemed. "This is the original transfer of the parcel," she said. "Father's line. The chain of title goes back. This is good, this is very good, but it's not the instrument we need. This proves how Roy got the property. It doesn't prove how he transferred it to you." She set it down. "We need the executed transfer on death deed, the original with all the signatures properly witnessed. The county has a defective copy. Somewhere there should be a clean original. Your brother..." She paused. "From what Otis tells me, your brother was not a careless man." "No," Eleanor said quietly. "He was the least careless man who ever lived." And something turned over in her, slow and certain, like a key finding a lock. A man who traced the outline of every wrench so that nothing in his keeping could be lost. A man who hid a journal behind a seam in the wall and waited 11 years for the right person to find it. A man who wrote in his own hand, "When the time is right, you'll find the rest of it and you'll understand everything." He had not left the document that would save the garage in a drawer where any thief or any flood or any careless hand could take it. He had hidden it the way he hid everything that mattered, and he had hidden it where only the right person looking the right way on the right day would ever think to find it. She had searched the workbench, the dresser, the cot, the pegboard. She had searched everything in that garage that a normal person would think to search. She had not searched the one thing that was not exactly part of the garage at all. "Otis," Eleanor said. Her voice had changed. He heard it and stood up straighter. "The motorcycle, Roy's motorcycle, where is it?" Otis went very still. "In my barn," he said. He stopped. "I've been rebuilding it 3 months now. Wanted to bring it here when it was done. Wanted it to be a surprise." "Why?" "Bring it," Eleanor said. "Bring it now." He went. He did not ask again why. That was the thing about Otis Boone. When it mattered, he did not waste time asking. He drove off into the gray morning, and he was gone the better part of 2 hours, and Francis Mercer waited, and Eleanor waited, and neither of them said much because there are kinds of waiting that words only make worse. When Otis came back, he had a trailer behind the truck, and on the trailer under a blanket was the motorcycle. "I spent my life giving. You spent yours losing. They look the same from the outside, Eleanor. They are not the same. I wanted you to know the difference before you ran out of time to feel it. Keep the light on. Your brother, who never once regretted it. Roy." Eleanor sat on the cot in the back room with the letter in her 2 hands for a long, long time. Eleanor walked around it slowly. She had never in her life sat on a motorcycle. She had spent decades being told that her brother's world was not her world, that his choices were not choices anyone should respect, that the distance the family kept from him was the right distance. And here was the thing he had loved most in the world, rebuilt by the hands of the man who had loved him. And she put her own hand on the worn grip of the handlebar, and it was smooth, smooth from years of his hand. Thousands of miles of road, thousands of mornings that had started in a garage just like this one. "Where would he hide something on it?" she asked. "Something flat? Something he'd want kept dry and kept safe and kept where nobody would ever look." Otis stared at her, and then understanding broke across his big, weathered face like the sun coming over the cedar line. "The frame," he said. "There's a compartment in the frame. Custom. He welded it himself years back. Said it was for documents. I always figured he meant registration." He was already kneeling, his big hands moving over the metal with a tenderness that did not match the size of them. "I rebuilt this whole machine, and I never opened it. Never had cause. Never even thought." He found the catch. It was hidden under a bracket disguised as a weld, The kind of thing you would never find unless you knew it was there, or unless you were the man who'd made it. He worked it with a screwdriver and a steady pressure, and a panel in the frame swung open on a hinge so fine it had survived 11 years and a full rebuild without anyone knowing it was there. Inside, rolled into a tube and sealed in a length of inner tube against the damp, was a document. Eleanor's hands shook as she took it. She unrolled it under the work light. Francis Mercer leaned in over her shoulder, and Eleanor heard the attorney's breath change. It was the transfer on death deed, the original. Roy Calhoun's full name in his careful block letters. Her own name, Eleanor Briggs, written out in full as the beneficiary. The legal description of the parcel. The date. And below it, every signature line filled Roy's, the notary's, and both witnesses the very signature the county's copy was missing, and the raised seal of a notary pressed clean and deep into the corner. She handled it the way Roy had, quietly, without announcement. A repair billed at the cost of parts, a bag of groceries in the bed of a truck, a check unsigned in a mailbox that covered a furnace exactly. She did not call it charity because it was not charity. Charity keeps score. This kept no score at all. She did not call it community. She just called it Tuesday. There it is. There is the whole story in one object. A document that meant nothing to a thief, nothing to a flood, nothing to the careless hands of the world hidden in the frame of a motorcycle that the family thought was the very symbol of everything wrong with the man. They sneered at that motorcycle for 50 years. They held it up as proof of what Roy had thrown his life away on. And all that time inside it, welded in by his own hands, was the one thing that would protect his sister on the worst day of her life. He hid her salvation in the thing they despised. If that doesn't tell you everything about who was the fool and who was the wise man in that family gentleman, then I can't help you. But I want you to notice the other thing. The thing that matters more than the document. She found it. Eleanor found it. Not the lawyer. Not Otis. They had the knowledge and the strength, but it was the 73-year-old woman who put it together, who remembered the man who understood how he thought, who knew that a careful man hides the thing he loves most in the thing the world loves least. Francis Mercer brought the law. Otis Boone brought the machine. But Eleanor Briggs brought the understanding. And the understanding was the only thing in that garage that could not be hired or borrowed. She won this herself. Don't let anyone tell you different. The motion was heard 6 weeks later in a county courthouse with a ceiling fan that turned too slow to move the air. Trent Calhoun was there. Eleanor saw him for the first time in 50 years and would not have known him a soft man in a good suit with his Uncle Vernon's jaw and none of his uncle's spine, sitting beside a lawyer from the city who kept checking a gold watch, as if his time were the only time in the room that cost anything. Behind them, in the second row, a man Eleanor did not need to be introduced to. The development concern made flesh. A man in an expensive coat who looked at her once The way you look at an obstacle and then looked away because to him, she was not a person. She was a delay. Frances Mercer wore gray. She set the original deed before the judge with no ceremony at all, and she said in a voice as dry and exact as her handshake that the petitioner's entire claim rested on a procedural defect in a recorded copy, and that she would now demonstrate that the original instrument was and had always been properly and fully executed. The judge examined the document. He examined the seal. He asked 2 questions, and Frances answered them in single sentences. The city lawyer rose and offered a rebuttal that amounted, when you stripped the words away, to nothing at all. A hope dressed up as an argument that the old woman would have folded before it came to this. She had not folded. The judge took 11 minutes. He ruled the original deed valid on its face, the transfer on death proper, and complete the petitioner without standing to disturb a title that had passed exactly as the deceased had intended. He dismissed the claim with a flatness that suggested he had seen this kind of thing before, men with watches and coats coming after old women's land, and had not been impressed by it then either. It was over. Eleanor sat very still in the hard wooden chair while the room emptied around her. Trent Calhoun left without looking at her. The man in the expensive coat left first already on his phone, the parcel on County Road 9 reduced in an instant from an opportunity back to a piece of dirt with a stubborn old woman on it. Frances Mercer gathered her papers and snapped the briefcase shut and laid one dry hand on Eleanor's shoulder.